My name is Josephine, and at 53 I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak a mother could endure. I raised my son Marcus alone after his father walked out when the boy was just 8 years old. Through sleepless nights, working 2 jobs, and countless sacrifices, I believed love would be enough. But standing in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, watching my 28-year-old son's face twist with rage because I finally said no, I realized I had been wrong about everything. This was the 10th time he had asked for money, but something told me this confrontation would change both our lives forever. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if stories about family struggles and finding strength resonate with you. Trust me, what happened next taught me the hardest lesson about love I have ever learned. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when everything started to unravel, though I was too blind to see it then. When Marcus's father, David, abandoned us on that cold February morning in 2003, I made a promise to myself that my son would never feel the absence of that love. I became both mother and father, working as a bank teller during the day and selling insurance policies in the evenings just to keep our small apartment in the decent part of town. Those early years were actually beautiful in their simplicity. Marcus was such a bright child, always at the top of his class, polite to neighbors, and incredibly affectionate. He would wait for me by the window every evening, his homework already completed, ready to help me with dinner. I would come home exhausted from my double shifts, but seeing his eager face pressed against the glass would wash away all my fatigue. On his 10th birthday, I scraped together enough money to buy him a red bicycle with silver streamers hanging from the handlebars. I worked extra hours for 3 months to afford it, surviving on peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and walking to work instead of taking the bus to save every penny. The pure joy on his face when he saw that bike in our living room made every sacrifice worth it. He threw his arms around me and whispered, "You are the best mom in the whole world." We had our sacred traditions that bound us together through those lean years. Every Sunday afternoon, we would bake chocolate chip cookies together in our tiny kitchen. Marcus would measure the ingredients with scientific precision while I preheated our temperamental oven. He always insisted on saving the biggest, most perfect cookie for me, presenting it with a formal bow that made me laugh until my sides hurt. During those moments, flour dusting our clothes and laughter filling our cramped space, I felt like the richest woman alive. He would often tell me, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a mansion and take care of you like you take care of me." Those words became my anchor during the hardest times when the bills piled up and the loneliness of single parenthood felt overwhelming. Marcus was genuinely helpful in those days, not just with household chores, but emotionally supportive in ways that amazed me. When I caught the flu during his 6th grade year and could barely get out of bed, he made me soup from a can, brought me tissues, and even attempted to do laundry, though he turned half our white clothes pink. When I cried after particularly brutal days at work, he would pat my back awkwardly and promise that things would get better when he was old enough to help more. The teenage years brought subtle changes that I convinced myself were normal adolescent development. Marcus started hanging around with different kids, ones whose parents I never met at school functions. Their names were unfamiliar, and when I asked about them, Marcus would give vague responses about where they lived or what their families were like. His grades slipped from straight A's to B's, then to C's, but he always had reasonable explanations. Mrs. Patterson, his geometry teacher, was supposedly impossible to please. Mr. Rodriguez graded unfairly compared to other teachers. The chemistry lab partner never did his share of the work. I believed every explanation because I wanted to believe them, because the alternative was admitting that something fundamental was changing in my sweet, responsible son. When he got suspended for fighting in 11th grade, I took time off work I could not afford to meet with the principal. Marcus sat there in the office, looking so young and vulnerable, his knuckles scraped and his lips slightly swollen. He claimed the other boy had started it, that he was just defending himself, and my heart broke for him. I fought for a reduced punishment, arguing that Marcus had never been in trouble before, and that this was completely out of character. The principal, a stern woman with graying hair and tired eyes, looked at me with what I now recognize as pity. "Mrs. Thompson, sometimes good kids make bad choices when they fall in with the wrong crowd. You might want to pay closer attention to who your son is spending time with outside of school." I dismissed her concerns as the typical suspicion adults have toward teenagers. Marcus was my son. I knew him better than anyone else could. If there was something seriously wrong, surely I would have noticed. But the truth was, I was working so many hours to keep us afloat financially that I was rarely home during the evening hours when teenage trouble typically develops. When he barely graduated high school, ranking in the bottom quarter of his class, I was still proud. At least he had finished, unlike some of his friends who had dropped out entirely. At the graduation ceremony, watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown, I felt a surge of hope that everything was going to work out fine. The transition to adulthood was where everything began to crumble in earnest, though I kept making excuses and finding reasons to be optimistic. Marcus enrolled in community college but dropped out after one semester, claiming the professors were condescending and the other students were not serious about learning. He took a job at a fast food restaurant but quit after 3 weeks because the manager was unreasonable about his schedule. This pattern repeated itself over and over. Marcus could not seem to hold down any job for more than a few months. There was always a reason that had nothing to do with his own performance or attitude. The boss was unfair, co-workers were jealous of his intelligence, the work was beneath his capabilities. I supported him emotionally and began supporting him financially as well, depleting my modest savings account bit by bit. By the time he turned 25, Marcus had moved back into my house permanently. My little boy was now 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a deep voice, but somehow he seemed smaller than ever. He would sleep until noon or later, play video games until 3 or 4 in the morning, and contribute absolutely nothing to household expenses or maintenance. When I gently suggested he needed to find some direction in life, perhaps go back to school or find steady employment, he would become defensive and remind me of how traumatic his childhood had been without a father figure. "You do not understand what it was like growing up without a dad," he would say. "Other kids had fathers to teach them how to be men. I had to figure everything out by myself." This guilt-inducing response always worked because it contained just enough truth to make me question my own expectations. Had I failed him by not providing a stable male role model? Should I have tried harder to make things work with David, even though he was clearly not committed to our family? Marcus seemed to sense my vulnerability on this topic and used it skillfully whenever I tried to push him toward independence. The pattern of financial requests started so gradually that I barely noticed how systematically it escalated over the years. The first time Marcus asked for money as an adult, he was 23 and had just been offered what he described as a fantastic opportunity with a security company. He needed $500 for uniforms, boots, and other professional equipment that the company required but did not provide. The request seemed not just reasonable, but necessary for his future success. Here was my son finally taking initiative, landing a job with advancement potential, and asking for help with legitimate startup costs. I felt proud that he had found direction and hopeful that this job would be the turning point we had both been waiting for. The problem was that I did not have $500 readily available in my checking account. My bank teller's salary covered our basic expenses, but there was rarely much left over at the end of the month, so I took out a small personal loan from the bank where I worked. My supervisor, Mrs. Chen, even helped expedite the paperwork, knowing how dedicated I had been as an employee and understanding my situation as a single mother. When I handed Marcus the cash in crisp $20 bills, his grateful hug felt like the old days when he was small and genuinely appreciative of everything I did for him. "You are saving my life, Mom," he said, and I believed him completely. The second request came about 6 months later. Marcus's car, an aging Honda Civic I had helped him buy years earlier, had broken down completely. The transmission needed to be rebuilt, and without reliable transportation, he would lose the security job that was supposedly going so well. $800 for repairs seemed like a wise investment in his continued stability and success. This time, I had to be more creative about finding the money. I sold the last piece of meaningful jewelry from my marriage, a diamond bracelet David had given me for our 5th anniversary. I had been saving it for something special, perhaps to pass down to a future daughter-in-law. But what could be more special than securing my son's financial independence? The pawn shop owner, a heavy-set man with kind eyes, examined the bracelet carefully and offered me $750. It was less than I had hoped for, but combined with some money from my savings account, it was enough to cover Marcus's car repairs. When I gave him the cash, he promised to pay me back as soon as he got caught up on his other expenses. The third request was the most alarming yet, though I did not recognize the warning signs at the time. Marcus appeared at my door on a Friday evening in October, clearly agitated and speaking faster than normal. He owed money to some people, dangerous people, he said, and needed $1,200 immediately to avoid serious trouble. "What kind of people?" I asked, genuinely frightened by the desperation in his voice. "Marcus, what have you gotten yourself involved in?" He was vague about the details, claiming it was a misunderstanding about a loan from friends who had turned out to be less reasonable than he had expected. The important thing, he insisted, was getting them paid off quickly before the situation escalated. The fear in his eyes terrified me more than his words did. I worked overtime for 6 straight weeks, picking up every extra shift available and covering for coworkers whenever possible. My back ached constantly, and my feet were so swollen by evening that I could barely walk, but I told myself it would be the last time I would have to make such a sacrifice for Marcus. But it was not the last time. The 4th and 5th requests were smaller amounts, $300 here, $400 there, always for basic necessities like food or gas money, or small bills that he had somehow fallen behind on. I stopped questioning the details because his explanations only made me feel guilty for doubting him and seemed to cause him additional stress. The 6th request broke my heart in a different way. Marcus told me about a professional development course that would teach him advanced security techniques and guarantee him promotion opportunities within his company. The course cost $1,500, but graduates were supposedly guaranteed salary increases that would more than justify the investment. I borrowed against my retirement fund to pay for it, telling myself that this was actually an investment in both of our futures. If Marcus could advance in his career and become financially stable, I would no longer need to support him, and my retirement funds would be secure anyway. 2 weeks after I gave him the money for the course, Marcus casually mentioned during dinner that he had dropped out because the instructor was incompetent and the other students were not serious about learning. He seemed genuinely surprised by my disappointment, as if the money I had sacrificed meant nothing at all. By the 7th and 8th times, the requests had become so routine that I was barely keeping track of the amounts or the supposed reasons. Marcus would mention needing money for rent at some apartment he was supposedly sharing with friends named Tyler and Brandon, but I never saw this place or met these roommates. When I asked for their contact information in case of emergencies, Marcus always had reasons why that was not possible or appropriate. The money would disappear. Marcus would vanish for weeks at a time, without returning phone calls or text messages, then reappear with another crisis, requiring immediate financial intervention. Each disappearance left me anxious and sleepless, wondering if he was safe, but each return brought only temporary relief before the next emergency arose. The 9th request was the most devastating yet, because it represented the complete destruction of my financial security. Marcus came to me with what he called a once-in-a-lifetime business investment opportunity. A friend named Jake had offered him a partnership in a legitimate enterprise, something involving buying and reselling electronics. But he needed $2,000 in capital to buy in. "This is it, Mom," he said with more enthusiasm than I had seen from him in years. "This is my chance to finally become independent and pay you back everything I owe you. Jake has connections with suppliers, and we can make serious money if we get started right away." I maxed out both of my credit cards and borrowed the maximum amount allowed against my retirement account. It represented virtually every cent I had access to, but Marcus seemed so confident and excited that I convinced myself this really would be the turning point. Within a month, Jake, the business opportunity, and my $2,000 had all disappeared without a trace. Marcus claimed he had been cheated, that he was as much a victim as I was, and that he felt terrible about the money being lost. But he seemed more angry than devastated, and his anger was directed toward Jake rather than toward the situation that had cost me my financial security. Each time I gave Marcus money, I told myself this would be different. Each time I believed him when he promised to pay me back and turn his life around. Each time I ignored the growing mountain of evidence that something much deeper and more serious was wrong with my son. Looking back now, I can see that I was not just enabling Marcus's dependency. I was actively participating in my own financial destruction while telling myself it was love. That Tuesday morning in November started like any other weekday, with no indication that it would become the turning point in both our lives. My alarm went off at 6:15, and I shuffled to the kitchen in my bathrobe to start coffee before getting ready for another day at the bank. The familiar routine of measuring grounds and filling the water reservoir was comforting, a small anchor of normalcy in what had become an increasingly chaotic existence. I had just started my shower when I heard heavy footsteps on the front porch, followed by aggressive pounding on the door. The sound was urgent and demanding, nothing like a normal visitor's polite knock. My heart immediately started racing because I knew with the intuition that only comes from years of crisis management that Marcus was on the other side of that door. He stood there, looking like he had not slept in several days, possibly longer. His usually neat brown hair was greasy and disheveled, hanging in stringy clumps around his face. Dark circles under his eyes made his skin look gray and unhealthy. His clothes, a wrinkled black t-shirt with stains I did not want to identify, and jeans that looked like they had not been washed in weeks, hung loosely on his increasingly thin frame. Most disturbing were his eyes, bloodshot and darting around nervously, unable to focus on my face or anything else for more than a few seconds. His pupils seemed either too large or too small, I could not tell which, but something about them was definitely wrong. When he spoke, his words came out too fast, tumbling over each other in a way that made him sound desperate and slightly unhinged. "Mom, I need to talk to you right now," he said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation or even a greeting. His movements were jittery and erratic, like he was fighting some internal battle that I could not begin to understand. The smell that came with him was unpleasant, a mixture of unwashed clothes, cigarettes, and something else I could not identify, but that made my stomach turn. I followed him into the living room, still wearing my bathrobe and feeling suddenly vulnerable in my own home. "Marcus, sweetie, I have to leave for work in 20 minutes. Can we talk tonight when I get home?" He spun around to face me with an expression of pure frustration, like I had just suggested something completely unreasonable. "No, it absolutely cannot wait until tonight. I need $3,000 today, and I need it right now this morning before 10 o'clock. The specific amount hit me like a physical blow, far larger than any of his previous requests. $3,000, Marcus. Where would I possibly get that kind of money? You know my financial situation better than anyone." His face darkened with an anger that seemed disproportionate to my reasonable question, and he began pacing back and forth in front of our old sofa like a caged animal. "This is not a request, Mom. This is an emergency. I have an opportunity that will set me up for life, but I need capital immediately, or the deal falls through forever." I sat down heavily on my favorite chair, feeling suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. What kind of opportunity requires $3,000 in cash on a Tuesday morning? Marcus, please help me understand what is really going on here. Who are these people you are working with? That simple question triggered something explosive in him. His pacing stopped abruptly, and he turned to face me with pure fury blazing in his bloodshot eyes. "What is really going on? What is really going on is that my own mother does not trust me after everything I have been through. What is really going on is that you would rather see me fail than help me succeed. That is not fair, and you know it, I said as quietly as I could manage. Marcus, I have given you everything I have multiple times over the past 5 years. My savings are completely gone. My credit cards are maxed out to their limits, and I borrowed against my retirement fund just 6 months ago. I am 53 years old, with almost nothing left for my own future. Marcus's response was to laugh, but it was a cold, bitter sound that made me flinch and seemed to come from someone I did not recognize. Your future. What about my future? What about all those times when I was growing up and you promised to support me no matter what happened? Was that all just talk? Supporting you does not mean enabling you to stay dependent forever, I heard myself say, and I was genuinely surprised by the firmness in my own voice. Marcus, I have been thinking a lot lately, and I realize that constantly giving you money whenever you ask is not actually helping you build a real life. It is keeping you from learning to support yourself. The silence that followed my words was terrifying. Marcus stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, like he was looking at a complete stranger instead of the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. His jaw was clenched so tightly that I could see the muscles working in his cheeks. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and venomous in a way that made my blood run cold. You are a pathetic old woman. You know that Dad was absolutely right to leave you. He saw what I am finally seeing now. You are selfish and weak and completely useless as a mother. Each word felt like a knife being driven into my chest, but somehow I managed to stay seated and keep my voice steady. Marcus, you are obviously upset right now and you are saying things you do not really mean. When you calm down and think about this rationally, we can discuss whatever is going on. But my attempt to remain calm and reasonable only seemed to enrage him further. His face was flushed red now, and small flecks of spittle appeared at the corners of his mouth as he spoke louder and more aggressively. I am not going to calm down, and I am not going to think rationally about this. I am tired of pretending that you are some kind of saint for doing the bare minimum that any mother is supposed to do. You want to know the truth. I wish I was never born to someone like you. I wish Dad had taken me with him when he left, because at least he was honest about being selfish. The cruelty of those words took my breath away completely. This was not just anger or frustration speaking. This was calculated meanness designed to inflict maximum pain, and it was coming from the child I had devoted my entire adult life to protecting and nurturing. Marcus was not finished with his attack. He reached over and swept all of our family photos off the side table, with one violent motion sending frames crashing to the floor in an explosion of breaking glass. I am done with this conversation, and I am done with you, he snarled, heading toward the front door. Do not expect to hear from me again, unless you come to your senses and realize what you owe me. The front door slammed so hard that the entire house seemed to shake, rattling the windows and causing more items to fall from shelves. I sat there alone among the broken glass and scattered photographs, wondering how the sweet little boy who used to save me the biggest cookie had transformed into someone capable of such deliberate cruelty. The week that followed Marcus's explosive departure was the loneliest and most emotionally devastating period of my entire life. I kept my phone nearby, constantly checking it every few minutes for missed calls or text messages, expecting him to contact me with an apology or at least some indication that he was safe somewhere. The silence stretched on, endlessly broken only by the normal sounds of daily life that suddenly seemed meaningless and hollow. I sent him several carefully worded text messages over the first few days asking if he was okay and telling him I loved him regardless of what had happened between us, but they all went unanswered. Eventually, I stopped sending them because the lack of response was more painful than the silence. Cleaning up the broken picture frames became a heartbreaking archaeological expedition through our relationship. Each shattered photograph told the story of a mother who had loved completely and unconditionally, and a son who had once loved her back with equal intensity. There was Marcus at age 5, missing his 2 front teeth, but grinning proudly in his red and white Little League uniform, holding a trophy almost as big as he was. Marcus, at age 8, standing next to me at his elementary school graduation, both of us beaming with pride and hope for his future. Marcus at 16, awkward but handsome, in his first real suit for the junior prom, his arm around a girl whose name I could not remember anymore. Each image represented a time when our relationship had been simple and genuine, when Marcus's affection for me was spontaneous and my support for him felt natural and healthy. Looking at those smiling faces, I struggled to understand how we had arrived at such a place of mutual destruction and resentment. On Thursday evening, my friend Linda arrived at my door with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine, refusing to accept my protests that I was not good company. We had been friends for over 30 years, since our sons were in kindergarten together, and she was one of the few people who knew the complete truth about Marcus's escalating financial demands and erratic behavior. "Josephine, I'm going to say something that might be difficult to hear," Linda announced, as we sat at my kitchen table picking half-heartedly at our containers of lo mein and sweet and sour pork. "What Marcus said to you was completely unforgivable, but maybe this confrontation was necessary. You have been enabling his dependency for years, and it has only gotten worse with time." I wanted to defend myself, to explain that everything I had done came from a place of genuine love and concern for my son's welfare, but Linda held up her hand to stop me before I could begin. "I know you love him. That has never been in question, and Marcus knows it too. But love without boundaries is not healthy for either of you." Linda's words stung because they contained truth I had been avoiding for years. "But what kind of mother turns her back on her child when he is struggling?" I asked. "How can I just abandon him when he clearly needs help?" "There is a difference between helping someone and enabling their self-destruction," Linda replied gently but firmly. "You have been so focused on rescuing Marcus from every consequence of his poor choices that he has never had to face the reality of his situation. Meanwhile, you have sacrificed your own financial security and emotional well-being trying to fix problems that you did not create and cannot solve." That weekend, I found myself doing something I had never done before. Instead of respecting Marcus's privacy, as I always had, I went into his bedroom and really looked around, not as a mother tidying up after her child, but as an investigator trying to understand who my son had actually become. What I discovered in that cluttered, stale-smelling room changed everything I thought I knew about our situation and Marcus's recent behavior. Hidden behind his dresser, pushed far back against the wall, where it would not be accidentally discovered during normal cleaning, I found a small plastic bag containing white powder residue and what looked like tiny crystals. Under his mattress, I discovered items that made my blood run cold. Bent spoons, blackened on the bottom small pieces of rubber tubing, and what were unmistakably used syringes. In his closet, stuffed inside an old shoebox behind winter coats he never wore, were bills and letters I had never seen before. Collection notices from creditors threatening letters from people with unfamiliar names, and what appeared to be text message printouts discussing money owed and consequences for non-payment. Sitting on Marcus's unmade bed, holding the physical evidence of his drug addiction, I finally understood that all those emergency requests for money had never been about job opportunities or legitimate business investments or even basic living expenses. They had been about feeding a habit that was slowly killing my son and systematically destroying our family. For the first time in years, I cried not from sadness or guilt, but from a strange sense of relief mixed with devastating clarity. The mystery was finally solved. The erratic behavior, the unpredictable mood swings, the constant need for money, the elaborate lies about jobs and friends and business opportunities, the physical deterioration I had been trying to ignore. It all made horrible, perfect sense now. That Monday morning, I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed on my house. It was not an act of anger or revenge, but an act of long overdue self-preservation, and paradoxically, an act of genuine love. By protecting myself from further manipulation and financial abuse, I was finally creating the possibility for Marcus to face the real consequences of his choices instead of continuing to enable his addiction. Standing in my kitchen with the new keys in my hand, I felt something I had not experienced in years. A sense of personal agency and control over my own life. For the first time since Marcus had become an adult, I was making a decision based on what was healthy for me, rather than what would temporarily placate him. The decision to seek professional help was not easy for someone who had always prided herself on handling family problems privately, but it was clearly necessary if I wanted to break the destructive patterns that had developed over so many years. After spending countless hours researching addiction and family dynamics online, reading articles and personal testimonies that sounded frighteningly similar to my own experience, I found a support group for families affected by drug addiction. The group met twice a week at a community center downtown in a basement room with folding chairs arranged in a circle and motivational posters on the walls. Walking into that first meeting was one of the most terrifying things I had ever done. I had always been intensely private about our family struggles, maintaining the carefully constructed facade that everything was fine even when it clearly was not. But sitting in that circle of worn metal chairs, listening to other parents share stories that could have been chapters from my own life, I realized for the first time that I was not alone in this nightmare. There was Margaret, whose 35-year-old daughter had been stealing from her purse for years to buy methamphetamines. There was Robert, whose son had overdosed twice and been revived both times only to disappear again within weeks of getting out of the hospital. The group leader was a woman named Sarah, probably around 45 years old, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of direct, compassionate manner that comes from having survived something terrible. During the coffee break after my first meeting, she approached me with a gentle smile and said something that completely changed my perspective on the situation. The hardest thing about loving an addict is learning that helping them often means not helping them. It goes against every instinct we have as parents, but sometimes the most loving thing we can do is step back and let them face the consequences of their choices. Sarah became my informal mentor over the following weeks and months. She had been through an almost identical journey with her own daughter and had emerged on the other side with a healthier relationship and a daughter who was now 2 years clean and working steadily. I had to learn to detach with love, she explained during one of our private conversations after a group meeting. That means I can love my daughter completely while refusing to enable her self-destruction. In our regular talks, Sarah helped me understand the psychological concept of codependency, which I had never heard of before, but which described my relationship with Marcus with startling accuracy. You have been so focused on rescuing Marcus from every crisis that you have forgotten to take care of yourself, she pointed out. Meanwhile, your constant financial support has been removing the natural consequences of his choices, which means he has never been forced to face the reality of his addiction. The group sessions taught me practical skills I had never learned in my 53 years of life. How to say no to people I loved without feeling overwhelmed by guilt. How to set clear boundaries and enforce them consistently, even when it was emotionally difficult. How to distinguish between genuinely helping someone and enabling their continued dysfunction. Most importantly, how to redirect my energy from trying to control Marcus's choices to focusing on my own healing and personal growth. 3 weeks into my involvement with the support group, I made a decision that surprised everyone who knew me, including myself. I applied for a part-time position as a financial counselor with a nonprofit organization that helped families in crisis manage their money and plan for stable futures. The job posting had caught my attention because it seemed to describe exactly the skills I had developed through years of struggle and financial crisis management. My experience of stretching every dollar managing multiple debts and finding creative solutions to monetary emergencies had given me both practical knowledge and deep empathy that could be valuable in helping other families navigate similar challenges. The interview process was intense and emotional because it required me to share details of my own story with complete strangers. For the first time in my life, I had to articulate the full extent of Marcus's financial manipulation and my own enabling behaviors, not as shameful secrets to be hidden, but as educational experiences that had prepared me to help others avoid similar mistakes. When the nonprofit's director offered me the position, she specifically mentioned that my personal experience with financial codependency would be invaluable in working with their clients. "We need counselors who understand these dynamics from the inside," she said. "Theory is helpful, but lived experience creates a level of credibility and empathy that cannot be taught." 6 weeks after our explosive confrontation, Marcus finally called. I was at home on a Saturday afternoon working in the small garden I had started as a way to redirect my nervous energy into something productive when my phone rang. His name appeared on the caller ID, and my heart immediately started racing with a mixture of hope and apprehension. His voice was different when I answered, softer and more contrite than I had heard it in years. There was none of the aggressive desperation that had characterized our last conversation, but I could hear exhaustion and what sounded like genuine remorse. "Mom, I am so sorry for the things I said to you," he began without any preamble. "I was angry and frustrated, but that is no excuse for being cruel. I have been thinking about what happened, and I want to come home so we can work things out properly." For a moment, hearing him sound like my son again, instead of the hostile stranger who had destroyed our family photos, I felt the familiar urge to immediately forgive everything and welcome him back with open arms. But the weeks of therapy and support group meetings had given me new tools for handling these emotionally manipulative situations. "I love you, Marcus," I told him as calmly as I could manage. "But I cannot let you live in my house unless you are actively participating in a drug treatment program and have been completely clean for at least 6 months. I also need to see that you are supporting yourself financially and taking responsibility for your own life before we can begin rebuilding our relationship." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for nearly a full minute. I could hear Marcus breathing, and I imagined him processing this completely unexpected response to what he had probably assumed would be an easy reconciliation. When he finally spoke again, his voice had transformed back into the angry, entitled tone I had become so familiar with. "You are my mother. You are supposed to help me when I am struggling and having a hard time, not abandon me when I need you the most. What kind of parent turns their back on their own child?" "I am not abandoning you," I replied, drawing on the strength I had found through weeks of practicing these conversations in group therapy. "I am finally loving you in a way that might actually help you, instead of enabling you to continue destroying your life and mine." When Marcus started cursing at me again, using language that would have made me cry just 2 months earlier, I quietly hung up the phone. For the first time in my adult life, I did not burst into tears after a confrontation with my son. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of strength and self-respect that I had not experienced in years. The 6 months that followed were simultaneously the most difficult and the most liberating period of my entire adult life. I used that time to completely reshape my existence, focusing on my own healing and growth, instead of obsessing over Marcus's problems and whereabouts. The part-time counseling position at the nonprofit quickly evolved into a full-time opportunity when the organization received a significant grant to expand their financial counseling services. My supervisor, a kind woman named Patricia, who had founded the organization after her own struggles with financial abuse, recognized my natural ability to connect with clients who were trapped in similar destructive patterns. Working with families who were caught in cycles of financial manipulation and codependency was both challenging and incredibly rewarding. I met mothers who had been secretly paying their adult children's rent for years, while those children refused to work or take responsibility for themselves. I counseled elderly couples who had depleted their retirement savings to fund their adult children's gambling addictions or drug habits. In each case, the underlying dynamic was heartbreakingly familiar. People who loved completely and without boundaries, enabling the very behaviors they desperately wanted to change. My own experience gave me credibility with these clients that no amount of formal education could have provided. With my increased income and the financial discipline I had learned through bitter experience, I was finally able to begin paying off my credit card debt and rebuilding the retirement savings I had destroyed trying to rescue Marcus. More importantly, I started to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under years of worry guilt and crisis management. I joined a book club at the local library, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for when my life revolved around Marcus's emergencies. I started taking yoga classes at the community center, discovering that physical exercise was an excellent way to manage the anxiety and stress that had been constant companions for so many years. On weekends, I experimented with container gardening on my small patio, finding unexpected joy in nurturing plants that actually responded positively to care and attention. There was something deeply satisfying about tending to living things that thrived when given appropriate support rather than withering despite constant intervention. My support group friends gradually became like a second family to me. We celebrated each other's victories and provided comfort during setbacks. When Linda's grandson graduated from high school with honors, our entire group attended the ceremony to cheer him on. When another member's husband was diagnosed with cancer, we organized meal deliveries and transportation to medical appointments. For the first time in my adult life, I was learning what healthy relationships actually looked like. People who supported each other without enabling destructive behaviors, who cared deeply while maintaining appropriate boundaries, who offered help without sacrificing their own well-being in the process. During this period of rebuilding, I had no contact with Marcus at all. My changed phone number meant he could not reach me impulsively during crises, and my new address was not something he could easily discover. Initially, this complete separation felt unnatural and painful, but gradually, I began to appreciate the peace and stability it brought to my daily life. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday evening in May, almost exactly 6 months after our last conversation. I was in my kitchen preparing dinner when my work phone rang. It was unusual to receive calls on that number after business hours, but sometimes clients in crisis needed to reach someone urgently. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Marcus," the voice said, and I immediately recognized my son, despite the fact that he sounded completely different from the angry, desperate person I had last spoken to. His voice was clear and focused, with none of the jittery desperation that had characterized our recent interactions. "I got this number from the nonprofit where you work. I know I have no right to ask this after everything that has happened, but could we meet for coffee somewhere? I have some things I need to tell you, and I would prefer to do it in person, if you are willing." My heart started racing, but I managed to keep my voice steady and professional. "I would like that, Marcus. There is a coffee shop called Brewed Awakening on Elm Street downtown. Would Saturday afternoon work for you?" When I saw him walking toward me through the coffee shop entrance that weekend, I barely recognized the person approaching my table. Marcus had gained weight in a healthy way, filling out his frame, instead of looking gaunt and hollow like the last time I had seen him. His hair was clean and neatly cut, and he was wearing clothes that actually fit him properly and looked recently purchased. Most remarkably, his eyes were completely clear and focused. They met mine directly, instead of darting around nervously, and there was no trace of the bloodshot confusion that had become his normal appearance. He moved with purpose and confidence rather than the jittery agitation I had grown accustomed to seeing. "You look really good," I said carefully as he sat down across from me at the small table. "Really healthy." Marcus nodded slowly, maintaining eye contact in a way he had not been able to do for years. "I feel better than I have since I was a teenager, honestly. I have been in a residential treatment program for the past 4 months, and before that, I spent time in a halfway house. I have been completely clean for 7 months now. He spent the next hour and a half telling me about his journey to recovery, speaking with a clarity and self-awareness that amazed me. How he had hit absolute rock bottom 2 weeks after our confrontation, when he had been arrested for shoplifting and spent 3 nights in jail. How a court-mandated drug counselor had helped him see that his addiction was not just destroying his own life, but devastating everyone who loved him. The hardest part of recovery has been facing what I did to you over all those years, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly for the first time during our conversation. In group therapy, we talk about making amends to the people we have hurt, but I honestly do not know if what I did can ever be forgiven. I reached across the table and took his hand, noting that his fingers were steady and his skin looked healthy instead of the gray, sallow color I had become used to seeing. Marcus, I forgave you a long time ago. But forgiveness does not mean we can go back to the way things were before. We have to build something completely new between us. Over the following months, Marcus and I slowly and carefully developed a relationship unlike anything we had ever had before. We met for coffee every 2 weeks, always in public places, rather than at either of our homes, and talked honestly about our experiences without the manipulation and enabling that had characterized our previous interactions. Marcus shared details about his recovery program, his struggle to rebuild his life from nothing, and his growing understanding of how addiction had warped his thinking and behavior for so many years. I told him about my work with other families, my support group, and the ways I had learned to build a fulfilling life, independent of his problems. Most importantly, Marcus never once asked me for money. Not a single time. Instead, he began paying me back small amounts whenever he could afford it, usually $20 or $50 at a time, along with detailed explanations of his budget and expenses. I want to take full responsibility for the financial damage I caused, he explained during one of our meetings. Even if it takes me the rest of my life, I want to pay back every penny I took from you, plus interest. 2 years later, as I sit in the garden behind my new townhouse, writing in the leather-bound journal I have kept since beginning my own recovery journey, I can honestly say that both Marcus and I are healthier and happier than we have ever been in our lives. Our relationship is built on mutual respect and genuine caring instead of guilt manipulation and financial dependency. Marcus celebrated his 2nd anniversary of sobriety last month, and I was privileged to attend the ceremony at his Narcotics Anonymous meeting. Watching him speak to newcomers about the importance of taking complete responsibility for their actions and making genuine amends to the people they had hurt, I saw the man I had always hoped he would become. Not because of my endless rescuing and financial support, but because he had finally learned to rescue himself. Our relationship today is everything I had dreamed of during those dark years when crisis was our only form of connection. We see each other regularly for coffee dinner, or simple activities like walking in the park, or browsing in bookstores. We talk about books' current events, his job, my work, and plans for the future. We laugh together about silly things and support each other through normal life challenges. Marcus has a steady job as a maintenance supervisor at the regional medical center work that he takes pride in and approaches with genuine professionalism. He lives in a modest apartment with a roommate from his recovery program, manages his own finances responsibly, and has even started taking college courses in the evenings with the goal of eventually earning a business degree. Most remarkably, our conversations now focus on his goals and achievements rather than his crises and emergencies. When he faces normal adult challenges like car repairs or unexpected expenses, he handles them independently or asks for advice rather than demanding immediate financial rescue. The most profound lesson I learned through this devastating and ultimately transformative experience is that love alone is not enough to help someone overcome addiction or build a healthy life. Real love sometimes means allowing the people we care about to face the natural consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are painful for us to witness. By constantly cushioning Marcus from reality with my financial support and emotional enabling, I had been preventing him from developing the strength, skills, and self-respect he needed to build an authentic, sustainable life. My well-intentioned help had actually been a form of harm that kept him dependent and prevented his growth into genuine adulthood. My work as a financial counselor has shown me that our story is far from unique in American families today. I regularly work with parents who continue paying their adult children's rent, while those children refuse to seek employment. I counsel spouses who cover for their partner's gambling debts year after year, never allowing them to face the consequences of their addiction. I meet siblings who drain their own retirement accounts to fund their relatives' poor choices and irresponsible decisions. In every case, the underlying dynamic remains the same. The person providing financial support believes they are demonstrating love and loyalty, while the person receiving that support learns that their actions carry no real consequences. Both parties become trapped in a destructive dance that serves neither of their best long-term interests. The recovery process taught me that there is a crucial distinction between helping someone and enabling them. Helping empowers people to solve their own problems and build independence. Enabling removes the motivation for change by protecting people from the results of their poor choices. Learning to recognize this difference has been essential, not just in my relationship with Marcus, but in every aspect of my life. Last week, Marcus stopped by my house unannounced for the first time since his recovery began. For just a moment, I felt a flash of the old anxiety, wondering what crisis had brought him to my door without advance notice. Instead, he handed me an envelope containing $300 and a card that simply read, "Thank you for loving me enough to let me grow up." I know that saying no to me was the hardest thing you ever did, but it saved my life. Standing in my doorway, looking at my son's clear eyes and genuine smile, reading words that demonstrated real understanding and gratitude, I realized that everything I had been through was worth this single moment. Not because Marcus was finally the person I had wanted him to be, but because he had become the person he was meant to be on his own terms, through his own efforts. The journey taught me that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to step back and allow them to save themselves. In learning to set firm boundaries with Marcus and refusing to continue enabling his addiction, I discovered my own strength and value as an individual, not just as a mother whose entire identity was wrapped up in fixing someone else's problems. Recovery is not just for addicts and alcoholics, it is also for the people who love them. Learning to love someone without enabling their self-destruction is its own form of healing that requires just as much courage, commitment, and daily practice as overcoming substance abuse itself. Today, when new members join our support group and share stories that sound exactly like mine once did, I tell them what Sarah told me during those early difficult days: detach with love. You can care deeply about someone without taking responsibility for their choices or protecting them from the consequences of their actions. Sometimes the hardest thing we can do for someone we love is to let them save themselves. And in doing so, we might just discover how to save ourselves too. I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences with this difficult topic. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between helping someone you love and enabling their destructive behavior? How do you set healthy boundaries with family members while still maintaining loving relationships? Please share your stories in the comments below. And if this message resonated with you, give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear these words. Thank you for taking this emotional journey with me today. And remember that sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do. Take care of yourselves, set those boundaries, and never forget that you deserve to live a life free from manipulation and financial abuse, even from people you love deeply.